What was your I was only gone X minutes. What the hell happened? Story? Someone used a fire extinguisher to put out a grease fire. And it was the carbon type, so the cook thought it was the proper fire extinguisher, and regardless of it being the right kind, it was still the wrong thing to do. The problem was there was a huge vat of grease at the bottom of the rotisserie, and when you turn on a fire extinguisher the spray comes out with such incredible force it splashed all the grease out of the rotisserie. Then that grease is all over the floor and it reignited, spreading fire all over the floor. When you have a huge vat of grease burning there's only one of two things you can do. Close the door to the rotisserie and let it burn itself out. Or toss a bucket of cold grease into the fire. There was a bucket of cold grease near the fire and I kicked it over, put the fire on the floor out. Then I closed the doors to the rotisserie to let it burn itself out. Now a lot of people are thinking, why is cold grease so effective at putting out a fire? Isn't it like tossing gasoline onto a fire? The answer is no, it's nothing like tossing gasoline onto a fire. Cold grease just doesn't catch fire easily. It has to be heated up first, which takes time. The grease cooking in a rotisserie has been heating up for several hours. The reason why the grease in the rotisserie caught fire was that grease is extremely hot and something pushed it over the ignition point. Grease does not mix with water, so water can't put out a grease fire. But grease will mix with other grease. If you dump a bucket of cold grease into a grease fire, what happens is the temperature of the total volume of grease becomes a compromise between the cold and hot, depending on the both heat and volume. If you have enough cold grease, the temperature of the burning grease will be lowered below the ignition point, putting out the fire. If you have a vat of burning grease, if you spray a powerful hose of anything directly into it, it does not matter what kind of fire extinguisher it is, if it's powerful enough, and most of them are, will cause the grease to splash out of the vat and spray all over the kitchen, setting your kitchen on fire. So keep that in mind. If you're using a fire extinguisher, don't jam it into the grease fire. Stand back and use it from a distance. This will probably be buried, but here goes. I wasn't the one gone, but I was in a room where all hell broke loose in a matter of minutes. I was a nurse at the time and a trauma came in where a guy broke both legs after jumping from a second story. It actually wasn't so bad, but we had the X-ray technician bring the portable X-ray machine to the trauma room and snap a couple shots of his legs. When this is done, the guy goes straight to the OR. Sounds intense, but it was an organized trauma. Guy was pretty stable the whole time. X-ray tech leaves along with the rest of the docs, and I'm left behind with a few other nurses cleaning up to prepare for the next trauma to come in. Our trauma coordinator, whose background is in nursing, comes down for a walkthrough, and we begin chatting casually. While this happens, EMS rolls in with a guy and they say they found him unresponsive underneath a parked car, so no way the car hit him, but he's not responding to anything. I give him a huge purple nurple, but not even a peep comes of him. Trauma coordinator notices blood coming from his ear and just mutters sheet, skull fracture. This is where all hell broke loose, as we were not prepared for what was to come. Trauma coordinator shouts at the clerk to stop registering other patients and overhead page and attending to trauma room, along with the level 1 trauma team, highest level, and a respiratory therapist. We wheel the guy into the trauma room. At this point, it's all nurses, so we all know what to do. EMTs are confused, as they suspected it was just a drunk guy sleeping it off, but they were way off point. Within 2 minutes, his clothes are cut off. We have him hooked to the monitor. 2 IVs are being placed in either arm. Our trauma coordinator is putting a cervical collar on him. And another nurse is pulling out RSI, rapid sequence intubation, meds. As our doctors walk in, the guy finds new life and becomes slightly combative, but we can handle. Doctors hear the story and are glad we called a level 1, but not sure why we paged the respiratory therapist. The guy took a turn for the worse when he begins to have a massive seizure. Our trauma coordinator says, "That's why." Doc shrugs his shoulders and says, "Alright, let's tube him." Maybe 5 minutes have gone by at this point, but the guy responded well to the meds. We get the tube in. Respiratory has come down. He's on the respirator, and the trauma team finally shows up. The room is packed, just for this one guy, and we tend to throw things on the ground as we are working, so it's a bit of a mess. The X-ray tech is called again to confirm tube placement and do other bedside X-rays before we take him for a CAT scan. The guy decides to put on a show. He starts to wake up and reach for his tube. We try to get restraints on, but this man has somehow become the Hulk, so equipment is flying as we hold on for dear life and sedate him, but these meds are not working. The guy got 16 milligrams of Ativan, 20 milligrams of Versed, but didn't stop fighting until we gave him more Atomidat. All of this could put down a couple of horses. Everyone is sweating. The room is a mess. Some blood has been spilled from the patient, but the patient is stable. Outside we hear the X-ray tech. Why are they paging me? I just left. He walks in and just shouts. What the fuck? I just left 10 minutes ago. TLDR. X-ray tech leaves after taking an X-ray of a leg, only to come back in 10 minutes to a giant clusterfuck of a patient. My girls were, like, 4 and 6 years old. One summer evening I left them at home with their dad while I ran to the store to pick up a few things. I couldn't have been gone an hour. When I pull into the driveway and get out of the car I can hear both girls screaming and their dad roaring. I sigh and straighten my shoulders and walk into the house braced for whatever disaster is awaiting me. I go through the front door, round the corner, and see my husband lying in the hallway holding his head. His roars have subsided to a painful groaning. I hear scuffling behind the girl's closed bedroom door. I step over my husband's prone form and burst into the bedroom and catch the girls in the process of climbing out their bedroom window. I got everyone settled down and finally got the story out of them. It seems my husband thought it would be hilarious to scare the girls, so he got out the scream mask, put it on, and tiptoed down the hall and stuck his head through the half-open door. Before he could make any scary sound, the 6-year-old glanced up and saw him and immediately leapt to her feet and slammed the door, pinning his head. When he recoiled from that impact he staggered backward, cracking the back of his head on our bedroom door frame, and collapsed to the floor. The girls were planning to escape next door. The moral of the story is, don't mess with defenseless little girls. Sometimes they'll fuck you up. I wasn't technically gone. I turned my head for, literally, or 3 to 5 count. I was at the pool with my daughter. She's 2, doesn't care how to swim. But this is a graded pool, where the depth slowly inclines up to a shore-like edge. She was jumping up and down splashing in the puddles, and I was sitting about 10 feet away watching her, while talking to a friend. I was watching her and talking, when he said something funny, and I turned to give him a look. I looked back, and my daughter, in a matter of a few seconds, had taken a few steps to deeper water, about 1.5-2 feet, and was under the water, silently rolling around. I never cleared 10 feet so fast in my life. I scooped her up and set her on her feet. It was shallow enough to stand. I'm guessing she just lost her footing and couldn't right herself and panicked. No coughing up water, barely a sputter, she was fine. But man, when they say it can happen in seconds they aren't kidding. Whoever they are. I was barely fazed by it too. We continued our day like normal. My friend said, I know you're okay now, but it's gonna hit you later. If you need to talk, call me. He was right. That night I replayed events in my head and kept thinking. I looked away for a second. What the hell happened? I just couldn't get the image of her flailing so silently in the water out of my head. No one else noticed her. What if I hadn't? I cried pretty hard at the idea of losing her to such a tragic accident, and vowed to be much more vigilant at the pool or any other body of water. I also got her a life jacket that she hates wearing. The end. I was client-side APM on a construction site. Basically there to help oversee construction and make sure its impact on the school was minimal. We are moving a laboratory sink to build a new classroom/relocate the old one. There's an escutcheon on the sink pipe that is preventing us from removing it from the cabinetry. I tell our foreman, hey, don't worry about this right this second. Let me talk to our build maintenance engineers about it, knowing they had the tool that could help. I also wanted to get them to turn the line off, because it wasn't as easy as they had said it would be, to remove it. The foreman turns and looks at his left-hand guy, says, okay, we won't do nothing until you return. Step out of the classroom and go maybe 20 feet down the hall to radio engineering when I hear holy fuck, what did I just say? The assistant started poking at something in the pipe, a ceiling ring, something, and somehow knocked something off in such a way that the entire line opened up and literally started shooting out water at fire hydrant speeds across our very expensive science room. I stood for nearly 10 whole minutes in front of the stream trying to catch as much water as I could in one of those plastic waster paper basket and then dumping it down the bathroom next door. I was basically trying to shield anything built into the room that was used by the science class from a fire hose point. All I can say is fuck that guy, and fuck engineering. The valve to shut the line off was in the classroom below, but took them 10 whole faking minutes. More damage than when they drilled straight into the vertical water main in the building. This is the first time an AskReddit question has actually applied to me, so I'll give it my best shot. Back when I was a senior in high school, I started dating a girl from the town about 15 minutes away, and I thought I was truly in love with this girl. You know how shitty teenage relationships go, and you know that they normally end abruptly. Just like this one point, we had been dating for about 3 months, and I decided to go to a New Year's party with her after some people who were friends with her invited us. Everything's going good, the alcohol is flowing like water, and not a single worry in sight, when a friend of mine who I had told about the party pulls up outside, and I decide to go out and hang out for a minute or two. I was gone for about 7 minutes, and when I come back inside, my ex was nowhere to be seen. I decided to look for her, and it didn't take much searching to find her in one of the guest rooms getting d***ed by 2 random dudes she had just met. I remember it took a second for me to realize what was going on because of the amount of alcohol involved at a typical small town high school party. All I could do was leave because the damage had already been done. I haven't seen her since, and I don't really care to see her anymore. TLDR. Started dating girl in high school, took girl to party, went outside for less than 10 minutes. She decided to let 2 random dudes DP her while I was gone. I was living in the dorms with my roommate, and we both decided to get up really early to work on some homework before going to class. I was making a giant pot of coffee. I had one of those cheap rival coffee makers where you pull out a tray to fill with coffee grounds instead of a lid that flips up. I turned it on to start the coffee and then left to go to the bathroom. I was gone maybe 3 minutes. On my way back to the room, I see my roommate running out of the room shouting, "I'm so sorry. I made a mess." Confused, I ask what the crap happened. I got curious when I walk inside the room. There are wet coffee grounds and water all over my desk. What had happened? What I had put so many grounds in? It was a 10-cup maker. She was skeptical that the water would get to all the grounds. She thought the water would just shoot through and only the grounds in the middle would get wet, only to find out that the whole tray fills with water before coffee starts coming out. This spilling my coffee grounds and water everywhere. It was still salvageable, surprisingly. We both had empty 32-ounce Sonic cups from the night before, so after the coffee was done we poured it through a tea strainer into the cups to catch all the loose grounds that had gotten in, then poured it all back into the pot. Me and my cousin literally last minute decided to change Mexican Independence Day from Ensenada to Vegas, midway driving to Ensenada, but we actually had very little money. Plenty in Ensenada is very little in Vegas, so we rented a room on the way there at the Venetian, since it was I don't know why or how the cheapest place on the strip. When we got there, our room had been given to someone and they had no more double bedrooms, so we got upgraded to a crazy badass suite with a big jacuzzi, a big bar, the whole works. We decided things were looking up, but we had about $160 left to party N=NOTHING in Vegas, so we decided to go bet all of it slowly on the roulette via a pretty safe technique a friend had taught me. Neither of us gamble much, it's pretty slow, but also pretty safe. It took us until like 5 AM while getting pretty drunk at the table, but we had hit $1,100. So I stand up and tell my cousin to rinse and repeat. I went to take a piss and come back to $200 left. I ask him how the fuck he lost $900 so quickly with our safe technique. He said he lost, so he doubled, then lost again, so he quadrupled, then lost again, so he octupled. We stopped playing. I blacked out soon enough. We just had some poolside beers in defeat the next day. That day my cousin learned that if roulette math was that easy, Vegas wouldn't make so much money off it, and I learned to take my chips with me to the restroom. Through a rager of approximately 60 kids in high school, and an old friend showed up with some mescaline. A couple time units later I went for a walk with a friend. I was gone for about half a time unit and came back to people running out of the house, girls screaming, cheap beer sloshing all over the place as the rabble dispersed. Half a time unit or so later I managed to understand what the fuss was about. Someone fired a gun inside the house. It was my parents' house and I wasn't sober, so I stumbled inside and started shouting something. That was probably about who fired a bazooka? And why are my hands so big? I heard a door open in the upstairs bathroom and went to investigate. My old friend had shaved half his head and was standing in the doorway looking at me. I don't remember his expression, but I remember that his nose was impossibly long and his cheeks were kind of waving at me. Thankfully he was wearing shoes as the entire bathroom was covered in shattered glass. There was a bullet hole in the wall at about head level where the mirror used to be. He didn't even say anything. I didn't ask. Dude had a moment. Anyways, the rents were due back the following afternoon, so we spent the rest of the night trying to figure out how to acquire a mirror and install it while faked up out of our skulls. It turns out that it takes approximately 12 faked up teenagers to hang a mirror. Late to the party, but damn, do I have the story for this. A few years ago, I was 19 and living with my parents, who went on a week-long vacation. I went down to the city an hour away for class, got a quesadilla on the way. After a few hours, I started feeling really hungry. I didn't have any cash that day and just had some change, so I decided to grab a soda out of the vending machine, figuring if I could get some sugar in me, I would feel better. It didn't help, and pretty soon I was seeing stars. I needed some food and fast, so I got in my car and got on the interstate to head back home. I made it 3 miles up the highway when I realized my fingers were asleep. They felt busy, like I had thick, vibrating gloves on. Another minute later, and the feeling was traveling up my arms. I pulled off the nearest exit and right into a conveniently placed McDonald's, where I could use my card. I got in the drive-thru, placed my order, and had the idea to feel my chest. I couldn't feel my heartbeat. I didn't know if it was because I couldn't feel my hands anymore or what, so I pulled out of the drive-thru into a parking spot, unbuckled my seatbelt, and threw my door open. I clumsily slid my phone out of my pocket from the outside of my jeans with the side of my hand. I managed to dial 911 with my pinky knuckle and balance my phone on my shoulder. 911. Emergency. Do you need police, fire, or ambulance? Ambulance. My name is My Life is AP. I'm in a red Chevy Monte Carlo at the McDonald's off exit 5, and I can't feel my heartbeat. My limbs aren't moving right. My legs began to feel buzzy and thick and clumsy now as well. But the scariest part was that the left side of my face was stuck in a painfully contorted position. I think I'm having a stroke. The nausea hit a peak, and my legs were frozen. Every muscle from my shoulders to my fingertips was contracting painfully, causing my hands to ball up into fists, my fists to bend inwards, and my arms to cross my chest. Do this for 5 seconds as hard as you can, and you'll see how much it hurts. At this point, I was completely frozen. All I could move were my tongue and my eyes. The pain was sickening, and I was screaming into the phone in agony. I was so afraid. I was trapped in my own body. I thought I was going to die. I wanted to call my mother and tell her I loved her. I wanted to call up my ex and make one last amend point, but then the fire truck came. 3 firefighters came out and rushed over to me, shining a light in my eyes and telling me to breathe slowly. It was hard. They were trying to get my arms to relax, but to no avail. Several minutes later, the ambulance arrived. Paramedics came out and started asking me questions. Am I on drugs? No. Am I sure? Yes. Just please help me. They asked me to swing my legs out of my car. After several minutes of effort, I managed it, but barely. I had a person under each arm and they walked me to the ambulance. I was weak and could barely move and still very scared. Once I'm strapped to the gurney, my delightful new friends ask me if I had a preferred hospital. My answer predictably, was whichever one was the closest. Once at the hospital, I got fluids, 4 EKGs, 2 giant potassium pills, and some snack bars out of the vending machine. Also a $900 bill and a diagnosis of low potassium and dehydration point with my dying phone. I text everyone in my class, trying to find a ride back to my car 10 miles away. After some time, I get one. Once at my car, I text my mother a photo of my hospital wristbands and the EKG stickers. Guess who immediately calls me? I tell her the whole story, which she doesn't interrupt once, very out of character for her, and once I finish, I'm greeted with a silence of several seconds before she says, "Calm as you please, I leave you alone for one day and you almost kill yourself, TLDR. Bananas aren't just for scale, fakers." I used to be a direct care provider at a group home for children who had been removed from their parents' custody. The home was for children aged 0 to 12. A 3-year-old came in who the rest of the staff called Tiny Satan, which wasn't very nice. He had severe behavioral issues. A child psychologist once said it was inevitable that he would become a sociopath, which I also didn't think was very nice. Anyway, longer story short, this little boy developed an affection for me. We'll call him Kevin. Kevin didn't like people telling him what to do, nor did he like not getting his way. So anytime he got put in timeout, or had a toy taken from him, or was denied something, he wouldn't pup. Seriously. He refused to pup. He'd hold it in for days. Then he'd soil himself at daycare, and they'd send him home, which was a serious pain in the butt, no pun intended. It somehow became my task to potty retrain him. So I tried to make it a very positive thing, gave him initiatives, starburst candies, etc. Things were going very well for a while, not regular by any means, but certainly better than holding it in for 7 days. One day I came in for my shift at 3 PM and Kevin did not greet me as usual. I saw him sitting in the corner with the look of Satan upon his face. Apparently, he had struck another child with a toy block, the big rectangle one, and had been put in timeout. I waited until his timeout was over and asked him what happened, but he wouldn't talk to me. 4 hours later, just before bedtime, he comes up to me sweet as pie and says he has to go potty. I figured he had to go pretty badly, since he had not gone in a couple of days. He would tell me it hurt, or he didn't have to go. Yes, we did the usual things like apricots and increased water intake, so I jumped up, of course, to take him to the bathroom. He sits himself on the pot and, whatever, when I realize there isn't any toilet paper in the bathroom. I tell him to keep on going while I got some toilet paper. When I tell you the supply closet was literally 3 feet outside the door, I'm not exaggerating. I might have been gone 30 seconds. The toilet paper came in industrial packages, like 10 to a cardboard box, or whatever, and I had to open the box, then rip off the paper wrapping point. When I went back into the bathroom, it was like a goddamn horror scene. He had taken his own feces out of the toilet bowl, or maybe just popped into his hand, and smeared it everywhere. It was all over the walls, the toilet seat, the toilet tank, the sink, the undersink cabinet, the floor, the sink handles, above the toilet, the edge of the bathtub, the shower curtain, and all over him. In his hair. Jackson Pollock of Sheet Point. So I ended up hosing him down, literally, while he bawled and tried to bite me. Did I mention he also hated baths? And that's my story if I was only gone 30 seconds. What the hell happened? TLDR. Emotionally disturbed and abused toddler dances La Volta with Mr. Hankey. When I was in basic training, Air Force, at the end of your time there you have this thing called amnesty hour, where you are mostly free to talk to your military training instructor, Air Force equivalent of a drill sergeant, and tell him things that happened, that you didn't really want them to know, or that could be funny. So during this time I had to get up and go to the bathroom. I go and come back in the room. In a very serious manner the MTI yells at me to go grab Mosby from the laundry room located in our dormitory area right now. I was confused on why the fuck he needed him, but that doesn't matter, and I get him without question. telling him I have no idea why he wants you, but he seems mad. We get back upstairs and go into the room, and he starts tearing into him about sneaking in peanut butter packs from the chow hall and eating in his faking dormitory. How serious it is that he wasn't following a simple rule that had been laid out since day one. While this is happening I was like holy shit, but then I started to notice everyone else in the room trying to hold back laughing. After a little more of him faking with the guy, he reveals he is just messing around and everyone laughs their ass off. I was so scared for the guy for a few moments cause I was the only other person not in on the joke. I'm incredibly late to this thread in Reddit time, but this thread also happens to be incredibly relevant, so what the hell. This actually happened last weekend. Having one last big blowout this past Saturday before classes and the full semester got going. 3 of my good friends and I were all in my room and trying to play a drunken game of FIFA on my PS4. I decided I needed a re-up on my libation, and so I went downstairs and got a new one. This is where things went wonky. Get back upstairs to my friends showing me the HDMI cable was bent. No big deal, right? I'll just go downstairs and snag another one and we can get right back to our drunken activities. Only when I get back I realize that the new HDMI cord isn't working either. Must be the HDMI port on the TV. Nope, still not working. In my inebriated state I didn't want to believe my PS was broken and just wrote it off as I wasn't in the right state of mind for troubleshooting. Wake up the next morning and first thing I do is try and turn it on, but the faker still wasn't working. Now I'm out more than a fair share of cash to get the faker serviced and repaired, all for something I didn't do. The cherry on top is that all 3 of my friends deny that they did it. Either they're lying or we have a mystery PS assassin on our hands. Will I find out who really broke it? Am I destined to carry this financial burden all by myself? Stay tuned next week for the next episode of My Life Sucks. TLDR, my PlayStation got faked in the amount of time it takes to go downstairs and get a drink. I was having a night out in Hong Kong with a friend from Australia, which turned into a night of me trying to prevent him from fighting people and pissing on things, and also fighting things and pissing on people. As things were winding down we ended up at the bottom of LKF and saw a pizza place that was open. We walked in and he ordered. I didn't want anything. There were 2 Indian guys there and we all got to talking. Turns out they were Australian as well, and they got to talking. It quickly turned into my Australian friend telling one of them how much he sucks for living in Sydney and how cool he was for living in Melbourne. It then turned into a contest over who could eat spicier food. They were friendly about it though, and I decided to walk across the street to the 7-Eleven to buy a water as I'd had a rough night watching my friend. I got back and it was chaos. One of the Indian guys was on the ground clutching his eye and bawling like a baby. My friend had a bewildered look on his face, but was still managing some bites of his pizza. The wall was covered in hot sauce and those red pepper flake things that come out of a shaker. I asked the other Indian what happened, and he was completely unintelligible. I mean, it's not your friend's fault. Well, I guess it is, but kind of. What happened? What the fuck? The bawling from the guy on the floor got worse, and he eventually started yelling, I need to get to the faking hospital. My friend just kept eating. Apparently it was pretty spicy though, because he asked me for some water. Eventually the one guy, still stammering half sentences, grabbed his friend and they left. My friend had no recollection of it the next morning, so I never found out what happened. The rest of the night before and after that incident was an equally large shit show. I was at my grandpa's house a couple years back during spring break and my grandma and grandpa had told me to watch my brother for 2 minutes while they got the last of the things they needed. They were going to drive us back to my parents' house in a few minutes and my 3-year-old brother was playing in the front yard. I was watching him, but I decided to leave him just to check up on the pool, which was just built in my grandpa's side/backyard area. When I came back my brother had climbed on this tiered fountain in the front yard which was made of some sort of stone and was quite large. As I ran over to grab him off, it collapsed on him. For some reason there was no bolt or anything holding all the pieces together in the middle of the fountain or something. And my brother was a big kid at 3 years old. My brother's toe was nearly severed off, and his head was covered in blood because he had fell back and hit the concrete hard, and he was crying, and I didn't know what to do. The big heavy top piece of the fountain had amazingly missed his head, but he wasn't so lucky with the other pieces of the fountain. My grandma came out just then and was in shock. She called my grandpa over and they called 911, and I just stood there like an idiot. The fire department came first, which thankfully was very close, and an ambulance soon after. They moved my brother on the table in the kitchen and were asking me what happened. I told them, and I felt horrible. I had turned my back for about 45 seconds and now my brother had to be rushed to the emergency room. While we were waiting for the ambulance, I cried upstairs and couldn't believe what just had happened. Once he was rushed to the hospital, they had to do surgery on him to fix his nearly severed toe and stitch his wounds on his head and over his body. He was in the hospital for a few days and by some miracle he lived. He's fine now, and I hope he is unaffected by this incident. So yeah, that's my I looked away for 2 minutes and something happened story. I guess it's also my grandparents' I looked away for 2 minutes and something happened story as well. TLDR, my grandparents told me to watch my brother for 2 minutes. I walked away for a short time and a fountain fell on him. He was okay, but I always keep a close on my brother now. My sister was raising a dozen or so ducklings near her garden. She would let them wander in the afternoon while she worked, then round them up into the hut for the night. One night she went inside for about 20 minutes before rounding them up, came back out and all of them were dead. She called me sobbing. Apparently in that short time span, raccoons had swept in and decimated them. Bonus story, I worked for an internet company installing fiber. We were on a job doing a mid-sheath splice, which means you open up an existing active cable, cut into only some of the fibers without disturbing the active ones, so you can splice in new customers on the extra fibers. My boss handed me a tool. This is a ring tool. It's used to open up the outside of the cable without cutting fibers. You adjust the depth of the blade here and rotate it around the cable. Do not cut this cable. Our most important customers and about half the town's internet are on here. You know what? Just let me do it. So I turned around to grab the other tools, heard from behind me, "Oh fuck me." Turned back around and there stood my boss holding two separate halves of the cable that he told me never to cut. I had to spend the next 9 hours emergency splicing. My girlfriend and I got back from a long day at school and decided to be adults and eat chocolate chip pancakes drenched in syrup with bacon inside of it for dinner. We left for Kroger no longer than 15 minutes and come back. The entire apartment is filled with smoke and a small fire is in a pan on the stove. None of this was there prior to when we left. I rush over, toss the pan under some water in the sink, open the windows and set up multiple fans. Only one room is locked and has a light on, but after knocking multiple times still no reply. I assume the housemate cooked, left in a hurry, and didn't realize he left the stove on high. 20 minutes later the apartment is clear of smoke and I've decided to start cooking after sending a text to the group about the incident and to be more careful and not to burn the place down. Then tapping comes from the locked room and it continues. The housemate is faking playing his drum set. I knock on the door, no response. I pound on the door, no response. I'm smacking the door so hard the people who live below us must have thought their door was being knocked on. And in that moment I hear a little "I don't like you, I don't have to respect you." And that is it. He doesn't leave the room for the rest of the night. And no, I'm not a father, and he is not my child. This is college. And he got into it somehow. This after he said I couldn't cook. 2 weeks ago I was just falling asleep when I remembered I had not taken my birth control pills that day. I went to get my purse where I always store them inside the side pocket that's kinda hidden. I crawled back into bed not thinking about it. 5 minutes later my boyfriend woke me up because apparently my 8-month-old Pomeranian puppy had reached into my bag when he saw me put them away and got them out for himself, thinking I was hiding some sort of tasty treat from him. In 5 minutes he had managed to eat every single pink active pill, which are the ones with the hormones in them, expect for about 4. This is with him tearing apart the packaging to get to them. My boyfriend and his friend had only noticed because he was prancing around with the package in his mouth, apparently so happy he got something he wasn't supposed to have. Good thing too, because his little prance is what made him look suspicious. Took him to the vet immediately and he was totally okay. The doctor did laugh a bit when he said this was his first case of this ever happening. To my embarrassment, needless to say, I will never be putting my bag on the floor for 5 minutes ever again.